The auction house smelled of dust and desperation, two things I'd grown intimately familiar with over the past 6 months. Wooden chairs creaked under the weight of bargain hunters and opportunists, their voices a low hum of speculation and greed. I sat in the back row, my fingers twisted together in my lap, trying to make myself smaller than I already felt. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the peeling wallpaper look even more decrepit. "Lot 47, the auctioneer's voice cracked through the microphone. "Remote cabin property, Thornfield County, as is condition. No utilities confirmed, no recent inspection. Starting bid, $500. $500, the exact amount I had left after selling everything I owned. My grandmother's china, gone. My college textbooks, gone. The little sedan that had carried me away from the pack that rejected me, sold for parts. Everything I'd accumulated in my 23 years of existence had been liquidated, distilled down to 5 crisp $100 bills folded in my jacket pocket. 500 going once. My hand shot up before my brain could catch up with my desperation. Around me, heads turned. I felt their eyes like needles, pricking at my skin, assessing, judging. An Omega alone at an estate auction was already unusual. An Omega with pale blonde hair that marked me as different, as other, was a spectacle. Sold, lot 47 to bidder 72. Just like that, I'd bought myself a future, or at least a roof, maybe 4 walls, hopefully a floor that didn't have too many holes. The rejection had come on a Tuesday. I remember because it was trash day, and the whole pack house smelled faintly of garbage despite the cans being outside. Ethan, my intended mate, the beta I'd grown up beside, the boy who'd promised me forever when we were 15, had stood in the kitchen with his parents flanking him like soldiers. "You understand, don't you, Claire?" his mother had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's not personal. It's just, well, you're not quite what we envisioned for our son's future." Not quite what they envisioned. The words had been a knife, sharp and precise. What they meant was, too quiet, too plain, too weak. An Omega with no family, no connections, no dowry to speak of. I was a charity case they'd tolerated when Ethan and I were young. But now that mating contracts were being discussed, I'd become an embarrassment. Ethan hadn't even looked at me. He'd stared at the floor tiles, white with little gray flecks, I can still see them, and said nothing. His silence had been worse than any words. I'd left that night with a garbage bag of clothes, and my grandmother's one piece of advice echoing in my head. When the world tells you you're nothing, find a place where you can be everything. She'd died when I was 12, but her words had stayed, had sustained me through the humiliation of sleeping in my car, of working double shifts at a diner where the alpha owner liked to stand too close, of saving every penny until I had enough to... What? Start over? The cabin was my answer, a place so remote, so forgotten, that maybe I could forget too. The drive to Thornfield County took 4 hours, most of it on winding roads that hadn't seen repaving since the previous decade. I'd borrowed a truck from the auction house. They offered delivery services for desperate buyers, and I certainly qualified. The driver, a gruff man named Joe, who smelled of tobacco and motor oil, hadn't said much, which I appreciated. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked as we turned onto a road that was barely more than 2 tire tracks through dense forest. "This area's pretty isolated, no cell service for miles, I'm sure," I said, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches creating a canopy so thick that the afternoon sun barely penetrated. Everything was shadow and moss, and the smell of earth. We drove for another 20 minutes before the cabin appeared, materializing from the forest like something from a dark fairy tale. It was smaller than I'd imagined, single story, built from logs that had weathered to a deep gray, with a stone chimney climbing up one side. The roof looked intact, which was more than I'd hoped for. Windows, 4 that I could see, were dark and shuttered. The porch sagged slightly, but the steps looked solid enough. "Well," Joe said, cutting the engine, "it's standing. That's something." I climbed out, my boots crunching on the overgrown path leading to the front door. The air here tasted different, cleaner, sharper, tinged with pine and something else I couldn't identify, something almost electric. The property deed felt heavy in my pocket as I approached the door. According to the paperwork, this cabin had been abandoned for 15 years, part of an estate liquidation after the owner died without heirs. The county had held it for taxes owed, then eventually given up and sold it for whatever they could get, $500, my entire future. The door was locked, but the key the auction house provided turned smoothly, as if the mechanism had been oiled recently. That should have been my first warning. The second was the way the door swung open without a sound. No creaking hinges, no resistance. Inside, the cabin was clean. Not dusty, but livable clean. Actually clean. The wooden floors gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering through the shutters. No cobwebs hung from the exposed beam ceiling. The stone fireplace looked like it had been swept recently, the grate empty, but not rusted. "That's odd," Joe said behind me, his voice uncertain. "Place has been empty for 15 years? "That's what the deed says." My voice sounded small in the space. The cabin was one large room with a loft visible above, accessible by a ladder. A kitchenette occupied one corner, an ancient cast-iron stove, a deep basin sink with a hand pump, open shelving lined with, were those dishes? I moved closer. Yes. Blue-rimmed enamel plates, stacked neatly. Tin cups hung from hooks. Everything was clean, organized, waiting. "Maybe squatters," Joe suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "Though this stuff looks old, real old." A narrow door beside the fireplace revealed a small bathroom, just a toilet and a cramped shower, both pristine. Another door opened to reveal a closet, empty except for spare linens folded on a shelf. "Well, miss, I should get going before dark," Joe said, backing toward the entrance. "You got my number if you need anything hauled out here." I paid him from my dwindling cash, and then I was alone. The silence was absolute. No traffic sounds, no voices, no pack dynamics to navigate. Just me and the cabin and the forest pressing in from all sides. I climbed the ladder to the loft. A bed frame sat against the far wall. Just the frame. No mattress. The space was open, with a small window that overlooked the back of the property. Through it, I could see more forest, and beyond that, the faint suggestion of mountains. This was mine. This tiny, impossible space was mine. I sat on the floor and let myself cry for the first time since the rejection. Not delicate omega tears designed to manipulate or plead. Ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for Ethan's silence, for his mother's cruelty, for every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. I cried for my grandmother, who I missed with an ache that never faded. I cried for the future I'd imagined. The mate, the children, the pack that would finally see me as valuable. All of it gone. When the tears finally stopped, the cabin had grown darker. I hadn't brought much. A sleeping bag, a backpack with clothes, some non-perishable food. I'd figure out the rest later. Electricity, water, heat, problems for tomorrow. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the loft floor and lay down, my body exhausted. Through the window, I watched the sky darken from blue to indigo to black. Stars appeared, more than I'd ever seen in my life, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Sleep came slowly, and with it dreams. Or maybe not dreams. The images were too vivid, too real. A man standing in the cabin below, his back to me. Broad shoulders, dark hair, an aura of power that made my omega instinct scream danger and run and submit all at once. He turned, and his eyes. I jerked awake, my heart racing. The loft was dark. Below, the cabin was silent. But the air had changed. It felt heavier now, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, and beneath the smell of pine and earth, I detected something new. Something that made my pulse quicken and my skin prickle with awareness. Sandalwood. Leather. The unmistakable scent of an alpha. A very, very powerful alpha. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. But the scent was real, growing stronger with each second. Slowly, carefully, I crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. The cabin was empty. The door remained closed, locked from the inside. The windows were shuttered. Nothing had changed, except On the small table beside the fireplace, where I was certain nothing had been before, sat a single item, a cup of tea, still steaming in the darkness. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the loft with my back pressed against the wall, my sleeping bag pulled up to my chin, watching that cup of tea until the steam stopped rising. The logical part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through college, through working 3 jobs, through the systematic dismantling of my life, insisted there had to be an explanation, a draft through cracks in the walls, creating the illusion of steam. A cup I'd somehow placed there myself, and forgotten in my exhausted state. But omegas have instincts that logic can't override, and every one of mine was screaming that I wasn't alone. As dawn crept through the shutters, painting the cabin in shades of gray and gold, I finally descended the ladder. My legs shook with each step, whether from fear or from holding the same position all night. I couldn't tell. The cup sat exactly where I'd seen it. White ceramic with a hairline crack running down one side. The tea inside had gone cold, a skin forming on its surface. I touched the rim with one finger, real, solid, undeniably present. Beside it, I found something I'd missed in the darkness. A piece of paper, yellowed with age, covered in handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical. Property deed includes all contents and existing contracts. Review carefully. My hands trembled as I pulled the folded deed from my jacket pocket. I'd read it a dozen times at the auction house, scanning for problems, for hidden costs, for any reason this cabin would be so cheap. The language had been standard, legal jargon about property lines and mineral rights and liability disclaimers. But now, in the morning light, I noticed something I'd missed. At the very bottom, in letters so small I had to squint, was a single line. Traditional marriage contract binding, transferable with property title. Traditional marriage contract. The words didn't make sense. This was the 21st century. Arranged marriages were rare even among the most conservative packs, and they certainly weren't attached to real estate transactions like appliances. I read the line again, and again. The words didn't change. A sound from outside made me drop the paper. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate, distinctly male. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a cast-iron skillet hanging beside the stove, and positioned myself beside the door. My omega instincts urged me to hide, to submit, to make myself small and unnoticeable. I ignored them. The rejection had taught me that submission bought nothing but pain. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, polite, almost formal. Who's there? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Silence. Then, "You should open the door, Claire." The skillet nearly slipped from my grip. He knew my name. This stranger on my porch knew my name. Who are you? Open the door. Not a request, a command, delivered in a voice that resonated with alpha authority. But there was something else beneath it, exhaustion maybe, or resignation. I could refuse, should refuse. But curiosity has always been my greatest weakness, and fear has never been as strong as my need to understand. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, skillet raised. The man on my porch was not what I expected. He was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of build that spoke of physical labor rather than gym memberships. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with silver despite a face that couldn't have been older than 35. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a heavy flannel shirt, boots caked with forest mud, but it was his eyes that held me frozen. Amber, almost gold, with a depth that suggested centuries rather than decades, and the power radiating from him. I'd been around alphas my whole life, had learned to identify their ranks by instinct. This man wasn't just an alpha, he was something far more dangerous. "You bought the cabin," he said. Not a question. I did. It's mine. The deed, I know what the deed says. He glanced past me into the cabin, and something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or memory. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed no. But I stepped aside anyway, and he entered with the careful movements of someone trying not to startle a frightened animal. He was right to be careful. I kept the skillet raised. "My name is Nathaniel," he said, standing in the center of the room like he belonged there, like he'd stood in that exact spot 1,000 times before. Nathaniel Corvus. And this cabin, has been my home for a very long time. The deed says it's been abandoned for 15 years. The deed, he said slowly, says many things. Some of them are even true. He moved to the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size. Did you read the contract? The line at the bottom? My throat tightened. The marriage contract. Yes? He turned to face me, and in the morning light streaming through the windows, I saw how tired he looked. Not physically. Alphas like him didn't tire easily. But there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of burdens carried too long. The cabin was built in 1823 by my great-great-grandfather. It's been passed down through my family according to very specific terms. Terms that include an arrangement. An arranged marriage. I said it flatly, refusing to let him hear the panic building in my chest. That's insane. This is the 21st century. You can't just... People don't, he agreed. But this isn't about people, Claire. This is about pack law. Ancient pack law that predates your modern conventions. I lowered the skillet slowly. You're not just an alpha. No. He said it simply, without pride or shame. I'm a king. Or I was before I made certain choices that led me here. A king. An alpha king standing in my $500 cabin, claiming I'd accidentally married him by signing a deed. I should have laughed, should have called him crazy and demanded he leave. Instead, I found myself asking, what choices? He moved to the window, his back to me, shoulders tense beneath the flannel. 15 years ago, I refused a political mating. An alliance that would have strengthened my pack's position, but would have bound me to someone I could never love. The council gave me an ultimatum: accept the arrangement or abdicate. You abdicated. It wasn't a question. I could hear the truth in his voice. I chose exile. And according to the laws of my kind, an exiled king cannot return unless certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is, he turned, meeting my eyes, a true mate bond, recognized and accepted freely. The cabin suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. And you think that we're... No. His answer was immediate, almost sharp. I don't know what you are, but the cabin knows. It's been in my family for 200 years, and it's never been sold, never been transferred. Until you. I sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs, my mind racing. This is insane. Yes, I didn't agree to any marriage. I didn't even know you existed. Also true. So, what? I just leave? Pretend I never bought this place? Even as I said it, my heart clenched. This cabin, with all its impossibilities, was the first thing that had felt like mine in months. Nathaniel studied me for a long moment. You could leave. The auction house would probably refund your money, given the circumstances. You could go back to whatever life you left behind. Back to sleeping in my car. Back to the diner with the handsy owner. Back to a pack that had made it clear I had no value. No, I said quietly. I can't go back. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Then we have a problem. Because I can't leave either. This cabin is the only thing I have left of my family, the only anchor I have to who I was before exile. And according to the contract you signed, we're now legally bound, at least by pack law standards. I looked around the cabin, at the clean floors I hadn't scrubbed, at the dishes I hadn't placed, at the cup of tea that had appeared from nowhere. You've been taking care of this place, all these years. It's my home. Was my home. He corrected himself quickly, but not quickly enough. I've been living in the forest, coming here when I needed to remember. When the exile became too heavy. So what do we do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. He moved closer, not threatening, but with purpose. This close, I could see details I'd missed. The small scar above his right eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his jaw tensed like he was holding back words. We make an arrangement, he said finally. You need a place to stay. I need to not lose this completely. We share the cabin. No obligations beyond that. You live your life, I live mine. When you're ready to move on, we dissolve the contract and you sell to someone else. And if I'm never ready to move on? The question surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise him. His lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. Then I suppose we learn to live together. It was a terrible idea. Living with a stranger, an alpha king no less, in a cabin that barely had room for one person. Sharing space with someone whose very presence made my omega instincts war between submission and something else. Something I didn't have a name for, but terrible ideas had gotten me this far. Okay, I said, but I have conditions. Of course you do. Now he definitely smiled, and it transformed his face completely. You're an omega who walked into an alpha king's territory with a skillet. I'd expect nothing less. First, my space is my space. The loft is mine. You don't come up without permission. Agreed. Second, we split all costs. I'm not a charity case. Agreed. Third, if either of us wants out, we say so. No games, no manipulation. He extended his hand. Agreed. Do we have a deal, Claire? I looked at his hand, large, scarred, steady, and thought about all the hands I'd held before. Ethan's, soft and weak, releasing mine without a fight. My grandmother's, thin and fragile in her final days, squeezing mine with desperate strength. This hand looked like it could hold on. I took it. The moment our skin touched, something shifted. A jolt of recognition, of energy, of something that felt like a door opening inside my chest. Nathaniel felt it too. I saw his eyes widen, saw him go very still. Well, he said softly, not releasing my hand. That's unexpected. I pulled away, my palm tingling. What was that? I don't know. He flexed his fingers, staring at them like they'd betrayed him. That's not supposed to happen with a contract bond. That felt like, don't say it. I backed away, my heart hammering. Whatever you're thinking, don't say it. But we both knew. Somewhere in the space between rejection and exile, between a desperate omega and a lonely king, something had recognized something. And the cabin, with its clean floors and mysterious tea, seemed to hum with approval. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange dance of avoidance and unwanted awareness. Nathaniel kept his word about space. He slept outside, or at least I assumed he slept, though I never saw evidence of exhaustion on his face. Each morning I'd wake to find small improvements around the cabin. The porch steps reinforced, a stack of firewood appearing beside the hearth, the hand pump in the kitchen suddenly producing clear water instead of the rusty trickle I'd been managing with. He never asked for thanks, never even mentioned the work. He'd simply appear at odd hours. Dawn, dusk, the strange blue twilight that settled over the forest. Check something, fix something, then disappear back into the trees. I should have been grateful for the distance. Instead, I found myself listening for his footsteps, tracking his movements by the subtle shifts in the cabin's atmosphere. The air always felt different when he was near, charged, expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. My omega instincts, dormant for so long under the weight of rejection, had woken up with a vengeance. They noticed everything. The way he moved with predatory grace despite his size, the breadth of his shoulders when he chopped wood, the concentration on his face when he thought no one was watching, like he carried the weight of kingdoms in his mind. I hated it. Hated that my body responded to him when my mind knew better. I'd learned my lesson with Ethan. Trust led to rejection, and rejection led to sleeping in cars and buying cursed cabins with money I couldn't afford to lose. But my body didn't care about lessons. It only knew that an alpha king had touched my hand, and something inside me had recognized him. On the 15th morning, I woke to voices, multiple voices, rough and angry, coming from outside. I scrambled down the ladder, still in the oversized t-shirt I slept in, and peered through the shutters. 3 men stood in the clearing around the cabin. Alphas, all of them, though not as powerful as Nathaniel. They wore mismatched clothes, tactical gear mixed with worn jeans, the kind of outfit that spoke of rogues or mercenaries. One carried a knife openly on his belt. Another had scars across his face that looked deliberately earned, and they were surrounding Nathaniel. "You're a hard man to find, Your Majesty." The one with the scars spoke with mocking emphasis on the title. 15 years hiding in the woods like a coward. Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed, but his eyes tracking each man's position. I'm not hiding, Marcus. I'm living. There's a difference. Your pack doesn't see it that way. Marcus circled closer. They're dying, Corvus. Your brother's been king for 15 years and he's running everything into the ground. The council's getting desperate. Then they should have thought of that before they gave me the ultimatum. Should have. Could have. The third man spat on the ground. Doesn't matter now. The council's decided. You come back willingly. Accept the political mating they arranged. Take your throne. Or they'll make things very uncomfortable for you. I saw Nathaniel's jaw tighten. I made my choice. Tell them. They're done with your choices. Marcus moved fast. Faster than I would have thought possible. One moment he was 3 feet away. The next his hand was on Nathaniel's throat, slamming him back against a tree. You think you can just abandon your responsibilities? People are suffering because of your pride. The other two moved in, and I saw what was about to happen. They weren't here to talk. They were here to force compliance. And in the wilderness, force had its own language. I didn't think. I grabbed the rifle I'd found in the cabin closet. Unloaded, I'd checked. But they didn't know that. And burst through the door, step away from him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The oversized shirt barely covered my thighs. My blonde hair was a mess, and I probably looked like exactly what I was. A terrified Omega with a weapon she didn't know how to use. But I'd surprise them. That bought me a few seconds. Marcus released Nathaniel, his attention swinging to me, his nostrils flared, scenting. Well, what do we have here? An Omega. His grin was predatory. You didn't mention you had company, Corvus. She has nothing to do with this. Nathaniel moved between us, his voice dropping to a register that made the hair on my arm stand up. Leave, now. Nothing to do with it? Marcus laughed. You're living with an unclaimed Omega in the middle of nowhere, and you expect us to believe she's not unclaimed. The words came out before I fully processed them. I lowered the rifle slightly, meeting Marcus's eyes even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. I'm his wife, according to pack law, recognized contract. So whatever business you have with him, you have with both of us. The silence that followed was absolute. Nathaniel turned to stare at me, something unreadable in his expression. The three rogues exchanged glances. I'd gambled everything on a single truth. Pack law was sacred. A recognized mating bond, even a contracted one, carried protections. Harming a mated pair was one of the few taboos that transcended pack politics. Marcus recovered first. Wife. He tested the word. You're telling me the Alpha King who refused a political mating for 15 years just happened to marry some random Omega? Not random, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. The cabin came with a contract. I signed it. He accepted. Whatever your council wants from him, they'll have to go through both of us now. It was a bluff. A desperate, probably stupid bluff. But something in my delivery must have convinced them, because Marcus stepped back, reassessing. The council's not going to like this, he said slowly. They've been planning your return, counting on you being alone, desperate enough to accept their terms. Then they miscalculated. Nathaniel moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. I have a mate now. That changes everything. Does it? Marcus's eyes narrowed. Or did you just find yourself a convenient shield? How do we know this isn't staged? You're living in the woods. She shows up. Suddenly you're mated? Sounds convenient. You want proof? I don't know what possessed me. Desperation, maybe. Or the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. But I grabbed Nathaniel's hand and held it up, pressed against mine. The same jolt of energy as before, visible this time, sparking between our palms like static electricity. Pack bonds don't lie. The reaction was immediate. All three rogues stepped back, their alpha confidence wavering. What we'd just shown them, that kind of energy, that kind of recognition, it only happened with true mate bonds. Not contracted arrangements, not political alliances, true mates. Marcus stared at our joined hands, something like awe crossing his scarred face. That's not possible. True mates are rare. Finding one after exile, after 15 years? He shook his head slowly. The council's going to lose their minds. That's their problem. Nathaniel's voice was steel. Tell them I've fulfilled their condition. I have a true mate bond, recognized and accepted. The exile is over on my terms, not theirs. And if they don't accept it, then they can come here themselves and explain why they're challenging a true mate bond. Nathaniel's eyes flashed gold. I may be in exile, but I'm still a king, and no council has the authority to overturn what fate has decided. The three men backed toward the tree line, their aggressive posture replaced by uncertainty. Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the edge of the clearing. You better be sure about this, Corvus. Once we report back, there's no taking it back. The council will investigate. They'll test the bond. If this is fake, it's not fake, I heard myself say, and the terrifying thing was, I wasn't entirely sure I was lying. They disappeared into the forest, and silence crashed down around us. Nathaniel turned to me slowly, still holding my hand. The energy between our palms had dimmed but not disappeared, a constant hum of recognition that made my skin tingle. That, he said carefully, was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Probably both. I tried to pull my hand away, but his fingers tightened slightly, not restraining, just holding. You claimed me as your mate in front of witnesses. Do you understand what that means? It means they won't hurt you. It means whatever political game your council is playing, they have to factor me into it now. I finally met his eyes. It means I bought us time. Time for what? Good question. Time to figure out what the spark between us meant? Time to understand why a rejected Omega and an exiled king seemed to fit together like puzzle pieces? Time to decide if the impossible thing I was feeling was real, or just desperation wearing a prettier mask. Time to figure out what we're doing, I said finally. You said the exile could end with a true mate bond. Well, apparently we have something that looks like one. Maybe we can use that. Get your throne back. Get your life back. And what do you get? His thumb traced across my knuckles, the gesture absent-minded but intimate. Beyond a cabin that came with an unexpected husband. I thought about Ethan's rejection, about sleeping in my car, about every moment I'd been told I wasn't enough, wasn't valuable, wasn't worth choosing. Respect, I said quietly. I get to be something more than a rejected Omega with no future. Even if it's just pretend, even if it's just for a little while, I get to matter. Something shifted in his expression. He released my hand finally, but didn't step away. It won't be easy. The council will test us. They'll look for cracks, for proof we're lying. True mate bonds have specific markers: scent compatibility, energy synchronization, emotional resonance. We'll have to convince them we have all of it. So we practice. I crossed my arms, suddenly very aware of how little I was wearing. We learn each other. We make it convincing. And when it's over, when I have my throne back and you have your respect. He said the word carefully, like he didn't quite believe it was all I wanted. What happens to the bond then? We dissolve it. Like you said the first day, no obligations beyond what we agree to. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he could see through every lie I was telling myself, that he knew, just as I was beginning to suspect, that what had sparked between us wasn't something that could be dissolved with paperwork and good intentions. Okay, he said finally. We'll try it your way. But Claire? He waited until I looked at him. When this ends badly, and it will end badly, because things like this always do, don't say I didn't warn you. He walked away before I could respond, disappearing into the cabin, and then out the back door, heading into the forest that had been his home for 15 years. I stood in the clearing, my hand still tingling where he'd held it, and wondered what I'd just set in motion. Inside, the cabin felt different. More alive, somehow, like by speaking our arrangement out loud, by naming what we were trying to do, we'd awakened something that had been sleeping in the walls. On the table by the fireplace, another cup of tea sat steaming. But this time, there were 2 cups. The council arrived 3 days later. I'd spent those days in a strange limbo, learning the rhythms of sharing space with someone who was supposed to be my husband but felt more like a ghost. Nathaniel appeared at mealtimes. I cooked, he ate with quiet appreciation, and vanished for hours afterward. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of him through the windows, chopping wood or checking the property line. Other times, I'd feel his presence without seeing him, a weight in the air that told me he was near. We didn't talk about the spark, didn't talk about what Marcus and his men would report. We existed in careful parallel, like strangers in an elevator pretending the other wasn't there. Until the morning I woke to find Nathaniel standing at the base of my ladder. "They're coming," he said without preamble. "I can feel them." An hour, maybe less, I scrambled down, still fumbling with my clothes. "The council?" "Council representatives. They'll want to verify the bond." He handed me a cup of coffee. When had he learned I needed coffee before I could think? And leaned against the wall. "This is your last chance to back out. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I'll support whatever you say." I took a long sip, buying time. The coffee was perfect. Strong, slightly sweet. Exactly how I liked it, though I'd never told him. Small observations, I realized. He'd been watching me the way I'd been watching him, learning, cataloging, preparing. "What will they do?" I asked. "To verify it?" "Questions first. About how we met, when we knew. What the bond feels like. They'll be looking for inconsistencies." He paused. "Then they'll test the physical markers. Scent compatibility, energy resonance. It's intrusive. If you're not comfortable, I can handle intrusive. I'd handled plenty worse. What do we need to know? What story are we telling?" He pushed off the wall. Suddenly all business. "The truth, mostly. You bought the cabin, found me here. We discovered the contract. The bond recognized us when we touched." He held out his hand. "We should practice. If they ask us to demonstrate," I placed my palm against his. The spark was immediate. That same jolt of recognition that felt like coming home and falling off a cliff simultaneously. This close, I could see the exact moment it hit him too. The way his pupils dilated, the slight catch in his breathing. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "We barely know each other. True mate bonds don't require knowledge. They require..." He struggled for words. "Recognition. Your omega recognizes my alpha. My alpha recognizes your omega. Everything else is just details. But you refused a political mating because you couldn't love them. What makes this different?" His fingers tightened around mine. "Because I wasn't given a choice with them. Because she looked at me and saw a crown, not a person. Because every word she spoke was calculated to please rather than challenge." He met my eyes. "You burst out of the cabin in a t-shirt holding an unloaded rifle to protect a man you barely knew. You claimed me as yours in front of witnesses because it was the right move, not the safe one. That's the difference." Before I could respond, he released my hand and moved to the window. "They're here." 3 vehicles pulled into the clearing. Expensive SUVs that looked obscene against the rustic backdrop. 7 people emerged, all of them radiating authority. 5 men, 2 women, dressed in formal attire that seemed designed to intimidate. The oldest, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, led the group. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, who'd shaped pack politics with nothing but will and strategy. "Counselor Helena," Nathaniel said quietly. "She's the one who gave me the ultimatum 15 years ago. We met them outside. I'd dressed carefully. Jeans, a simple sweater, my blonde hair pulled back. I wanted to look competent, not staged. Real, not calculated." Helena's gaze swept over me with surgical precision. "So, the mysterious Omega who supposedly captured our wayward king's heart," her voice dripped skepticism. "How convenient." "Counselor." Nathaniel's tone was neutral, but I felt the tension in his posture. "You received Marcus's report." "We did. Quite the theatrical tale. A true mate bond appearing out of nowhere after 15 years of exile." She circled us slowly, assessing. "Forgive my suspicion, but in 200 years of service to this pack, I've never seen fate work quite so tidily." "Fate rarely asks permission," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't plan to buy a haunted cabin or discover I'd accidentally married a king, but here we are." One of the men, younger, with sharp features and expensive cologne, laughed. "She has spirit. I'll give her that." "Spirit doesn't prove a bond." Helena stopped in front of me. "What's your name, girl?" "Claire." Claire Whitmore. And your pack affiliation? The question was designed to wound. I kept my expression neutral. None. I was asked to leave my previous pack. Rejected. Helena said it bluntly. A rejected Omega shows up at an exiled king's doorstep. And we're supposed to believe true mate destiny brought you together? She shook her head. Try again. It's the truth. Nathaniel moved closer, his presence a wall at my back. The cabin has been in my family for 2 centuries. It's never been sold, never been transferred outside our bloodline. Until the county seized it for unpaid taxes, and Claire bought it at auction. The moment she signed the deed, the ancient contract activated. Show me the deed. I produced it from my pocket, the paper now worn from constant handling. Helena snatched it, her eyes scanning the text. When she reached the bottom line, her expression flickered. Just for a moment, but I saw it. Surprise. Maybe even concern. This contract. She looked at Nathaniel. Your great-great-grandfather wrote this? Yes. As insurance, in case the line ever broke. Whoever owned the cabin would be bound by traditional marriage laws. It was meant to protect the property, keep it in the family. But true mate bonds can't be contracted. This from one of the other counselors, a man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely confused. They're biological, spiritual. You can't legislate them into existence. You can't, Nathaniel agreed. But you can create the conditions for recognition. My ancestor was a seer. He built the cabin on a convergence point, a place where energy flows strong. The contract doesn't create the bond. It creates the opportunity for the bond to reveal itself. Helena folded the deed carefully. Convenient story. Now prove it. How? I asked. Give me your hand. I extended my hand, fighting the urge to pull back when her fingers wrapped around my wrist. Her grip was cold, clinical. She closed her eyes, and I felt something push against my consciousness, a probing, invasive sensation that made my Omega instincts snarl. She's definitely an Omega, Helena said after a moment. Stronger than she appears, which is interesting. And her scent. She inhaled deeply. Lavender, honey, and something else. Something that complements. She released me, turning to Nathaniel. Your hand. He obeyed without hesitation. Helena repeated the process, her expression growing more troubled with each passing second. Sandalwood, leather, and alpine frost, she murmured. Exact complements. That's... She opened her eyes. That's impossible to fake, but not proof of a true bond, the younger man interjected. Scent compatibility can be coincidence. Then test the energy. Nathaniel held out his hand to me. Claire. I took it, and the spark flared immediately. Stronger this time. Visible to everyone watching, a shimmer of gold and silver light dancing between our joined palms. The reaction from the council was immediate. Several stepped back. Others leaned forward, fascinated. Helena's expression had gone from skeptical to calculating. Energy resonance, she said softly. I haven't seen that kind of synchronization in decades. She looked between us. But the final test is emotional resonance. True mates don't just complement physically. They mirror emotionally. They know each other's thoughts, feelings, sometimes even before they're articulated. We've only known each other a few weeks, I protested. Then this should be easy to disprove. Helena gestured to one of her companions, who pulled out a small device. This measures cortisol and oxytocin levels through skin contact. If you're truly bonded, your stress responses will mirror each other. Your comfort hormones will spike in each other's presence. They attach sensors to both of us. Cold metal against my wrist, my temple. The device hummed to life, displaying readings I couldn't interpret. Now, Helena said, I'm going to ask you questions. Answer honestly, and the readings will tell us if you're lying. Not just in words, but in biochemistry. She turned to me first. Claire, why did your previous pack reject you? The question hit like a fist. I felt my heart rate spike, saw the device register my distress. Because I wasn't good enough, not connected enough, not valuable enough. My intended mate's family decided I would be a liability rather than an asset. And how did that make you feel? Like I was nothing. Like I'd never be anything. The machine beeped. Helena glanced at it, then at Nathaniel. His readings had changed too, his stress response spiking in direct correlation with mine, mirror reactions. Nathaniel, Helena continued, why did you choose exile over the political mating we arranged? His jaw tensed. Because the woman you chose looked at me and saw a crown, a title, a means to power. She couldn't tell you a single thing about who I was beyond my position. That's not a partnership. That's a transaction. And that bothered you? Many alphas would be grateful for a mate who didn't demand emotional complexity. I'm not most alphas. His fingers tightened around mine. I wanted someone who would choose me. Not my throne, not my power. Me. The machine beeped again. My readings had shifted. Heart rate stabilizing, oxytocin levels rising, the comfort response, I realized. His honesty, his vulnerability, was calming my nervous system. Helena saw it too. Her expression had gone from calculating to resigned. One more question. Both of you. She looked between us. What do you fear most about this bond? Nathaniel answered first, that it's real. That 15 years of exile led me to exactly where I needed to be. And I'll ruin it because I've forgotten how to trust anything good. I felt tears prick my eyes. My response came without thought, that it's temporary, that I'll finally feel like I belong somewhere, with someone. And then fate will remember I'm just a rejected Omega who bought a cabin she couldn't afford, and take it all away. The machines went quiet. Both of us were crying, not dramatically, just silent tears tracking down our faces. Our hands remained joined, the spark pulsing with each shared breath. Helena removed the sensors with unusual gentleness. I've tested bonds for 50 years, she said quietly. I've seen political alliances masquerading as love. I've seen desperation dressed up as destiny. But this, she gestured at the machines, at our joined hands, at the tears neither of us were bothering to hide. This is real. Messier than I'd like, more complicated than it should be. But real, the younger counselor spoke up. So what now? We just accept that our exiled king found his mate by accident? We accept, Helena said firmly, that exile served its purpose. Nathaniel refused a false bond and waited, consciously or not, for a true one. The terms of his exile have been met. She turned to Nathaniel. The council recognizes your mate bond. You're welcome to return, to reclaim your throne. The silence stretched. I waited for him to celebrate, to show relief, something. Instead, he just looked at me, a question in his eyes. And if I choose to stay here, he asked Helena, but his gaze never left mine. If I choose a small cabin and a true mate over a throne in political games, Helena sighed. Then I'd say you've learned nothing from exile. But I'd respect your choice. Your brother has been king for 15 years. He can continue. We came here to verify the bond, not to drag you back against your will. Good. Nathaniel's thumb traced circles on my palm. Because I'm not going anywhere, not yet. The council departed with considerably less fanfare than they'd arrived. As their vehicles disappeared into the forest, I turned to Nathaniel. You could go back, I said. Be king again. Isn't that what you wanted? I thought so. For 15 years I thought exile was punishment, that going back was the goal. He raised our joined hands, studying the way they fit together. But maybe exile was never the punishment. Maybe it was preparation. For this. For you. That's a nice story, I whispered. But we both know this started as pretend. A contract. A convenience. It started that way, he agreed. But Claire? I don't think it's pretend anymore. Do you? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because he was right, and that was the most terrifying truth of all. The weeks that followed the council's visit existed in a space between real and impossible. Like living inside a dream I was terrified to wake from. Nathaniel didn't return to his throne. He didn't leave the cabin. Instead, he moved his few belongings inside. Clothes that had been stored in weatherproof containers hidden in the forest, books worn soft with reading, a carved wooden box that he placed on the mantel without explanation. What's in it? I asked one evening, watching firelight dance across the box's intricate surface. Memories, he said simply. From before. I didn't push. We were learning each other in increments, in the small revelations that came with shared space. I learned he woke before dawn and watched the sunrise from the porch. He learned I needed silence in the mornings before I could handle conversation. I learned he had nightmares sometimes. I'd hear him moving restlessly on the couch below, wrestling with ghosts only he could see. He learned I did too, though mine were quieter, just accelerated breathing and tears I'd wipe away before descending the ladder. The bond between us grew stronger daily. Not just the spark when we touched that had become as natural as breathing, but something deeper. I'd think about needing more firewood, and he'd appear with an armload before I could voice it. He'd start to reach for something, and I'd already be handing it to him. Our scents mingled in the cabin until I couldn't tell where his ended, and mine began. It should have been perfect. It should have been everything I'd convinced myself I wanted. So why did I wake up crying 3 weeks after the council left? I tried to be quiet, but in a cabin this small, privacy was an illusion. Within minutes, I heard movement below. Then Nathaniel's voice at the base of the ladder. Claire, can I come up? I wiped my face, pointless as it was. It's your cabin too. He climbed slowly, giving me time to compose myself. When his head appeared over the loft edge, his expression was gentle but concerned. Bad dream? Something like that. I sat up, pulling the sleeping bag around my shoulders. Through the small window, I could see stars scattered across an ink-black sky. Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake? He settled on the floor across from me, close enough to talk, but far enough to give me space. Every day. The honesty surprised a laugh out of me. Really? You seem so certain about everything. I'm certain about the bond, about what I feel when I'm near you, when I touch you, when I wake up knowing you're safe in the loft above me. He paused. But I'm terrified I'm being selfish. That I've kept you here because I'm lonely, because you make exile bearable without thinking about what you need. I need to not be rejected again, I said quietly. That's what I tell myself. That's why I'm here. Because being wanted, even if it started as a contract, even if it's complicated, is better than being unwanted. That's not true anymore, though, is it? His voice was soft. You could leave now. The council recognized the bond. You have status, protection. You could go anywhere, do anything. You're not trapped here by circumstance anymore. He was right. I'd been so focused on survival, on having a place to belong, that I hadn't stopped to realize I'd gained something far more valuable. As the recognized mate of an alpha king, even an exiled one, I had options. Helena had made that clear. The pack would support me, help me rebuild my life, with or without Nathaniel. Then why do I stay? I whispered. I don't know. Why do you? I looked at him, really looked at him, in the starlight filtering through the window. His dark hair loose around his shoulders, amber eyes reflecting the night sky, the careful way he held himself like he was afraid one wrong move would send me running. Because when I'm with you, I'm not a rejected Omega or a charity case or someone's mistake. I'm just Claire. And somehow that's enough. The tears started again, but these felt different, cleaner somehow. But I don't know if I'm staying because I want to, or because I'm too scared to find out who I am without someone telling me I'm worth keeping. Nathaniel moved closer, slowly, telegraphing every motion. When I didn't pull away, he reached out and gently wiped a tear from my cheek. Then maybe we figure it out together. Not as mates bound by contract or council recognition, as two people who found each other in impossible circumstances and want to see what happens next. What if it doesn't work? What if we wake up one day and realize the bond was just trauma and loneliness dressed up as fate? Then we'll deal with it. Together or separately, whatever makes sense. His hand cupped my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone. But Claire, I don't think this is trauma. I think this is the first real thing either of us has had in a very long time. And that's terrifying because real things can hurt us in ways fake things never could. I leaned into his touch, and something in my chest unlocked. I'm scared. Me too. I don't know how to do this, how to trust this. Neither do I. He smiled, sad and hopeful at once. But I know how to try. We could start there. I closed the distance between us, resting my forehead against his. This close, I could feel his heartbeat, rapid and uncertain, matching my own. Okay, we try. His arms came around me, careful but sure, and for the first time since my grandmother died, I let myself be held, not as an omega submitting to an alpha, but as a person finding comfort in another person. Equal, complicated, real. We stayed like that until the stars faded and dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. The message came 2 months later, delivered by a young wolf who looked terrified to be in an exiled king's presence. Your brother requests a meeting, the messenger said, handing Nathaniel a sealed letter. He says it's urgent. About the pack. Nathaniel read in silence, his expression growing darker with each line. Finally, he looked up. My brother is dying. The council thinks I need to know. My stomach dropped. Dying how? Same thing that killed our father, genetic condition that affects alpha bloodlines. He has maybe 6 months. Nathaniel set the letter down carefully. They want me to come back. Prepare for transition. Take the throne before succession becomes complicated. Will you go? He looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes, duty versus desire. The throne he'd been born for versus the life he'd chosen. I don't know. What do you think I should do? The fact that he asked, that my opinion mattered to him, meant more than he could possibly know. I took his hand, felt the familiar spark. I think you need to see him, your brother. Not as a king, but as family. You've been in exile for 15 years, Nathaniel. That's a long time to carry anger. He supported the council's ultimatum. He took my throne because you gave it to him. I squeezed his fingers. You made a choice 15 years ago. Maybe it's time to make another one. We traveled to the pack compound 3 days later. The journey took 6 hours, the landscape gradually shifting from wilderness to civilization. With each mile, I felt Nathaniel grow more tense, old instincts and memories surfacing. The compound was massive, hundreds of acres, dozens of buildings, organized with military precision. Guards watched our approach, their expressions carefully neutral. They recognized Nathaniel. I could see it in their eyes, but no one stopped us. His brother, Devin, met us in what had once been their father's study. He looked like Nathaniel might have looked without 15 years of exile. Groomed, polished, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical illness. The resemblance was striking and painful. Brother, Devin said, his voice rough, you came. You're dying, Nathaniel replied. Of course I came. Devin laughed, the sound bitter. Always direct. I'd forgotten that about you. His gaze shifted to me. And this is the Omega who broke 15 years of exile. Helena told me about the bond. I didn't believe her until now. Claire, I said, extending my hand. It's complicated. The best things usually are. He shook my hand with surprising warmth. Thank you for bringing him back. Even if it's just temporary. They talked for hours. Not about the throne or succession. About childhood, about their father. About 15 years of choices that had led them to this moment. I watched Nathaniel slowly unbend. Saw the anger he'd carried drain away as his brother apologized. Explained. Asked forgiveness for supporting the council. I thought you were being selfish, Devin said quietly. Refusing the political mating. Choosing exile. I thought you were abandoning us when we needed you most. I was, Nathaniel admitted. But I was also protecting myself. From becoming someone I couldn't recognize. From losing the last piece of who I was beneath duty and expectation. And now? Devin asked. Helena says you're still in exile, still living in that cabin. Why? Nathaniel looked at me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it. Because I finally found something worth more than a throne. Someone who sees me, not my crown. Who challenges me because she cares, not because it's politically advantageous. Devin studied us both. So you won't come back, even knowing I'm dying, knowing the pack needs you. I didn't say that. Nathaniel leaned forward. What if there was another way? What if you could continue as king, handle the politics and diplomacy you're actually good at, while I support from a distance? The bond gives me legitimacy. Claire's status as my mate gives me protection. I could be your advisor, your backup, without needing to sit on a throne I never wanted. That's not how succession works. It could be. I surprised myself by speaking. Pack law allows for shared leadership in extraordinary circumstances. A king and his bonded mate can rule jointly, or the mate can serve as regent if the king is occupied elsewhere. Both men stared at me. I shrugged. I've been reading. The cabin has books. Old books with very specific information about pack governance. Devon's laugh was genuine this time. She's perfect for you. Absolutely perfect. He sobered. But even if the council agreed, and that's a massive if, I'm still dying. Eventually someone will need to take over. Eventually, Nathaniel agreed. But not today. Not for 6 months, maybe longer with proper treatment. That gives us time to figure out a real solution. One that doesn't require me to choose between duty and happiness. We stayed at the compound for a week. I met pack members who remembered Nathaniel with fondness. Young wolves who only knew him as legend. I attended council meetings where Helena and I engaged in careful verbal sparring. She testing me proving I belonged. I learned that being the mate of an exiled alpha king carried its own form of power, that my voice mattered in ways I'd never experienced in my old pack. But every night, I found myself missing the cabin, missing the simplicity of firelight and forest sounds, missing the version of us that existed away from politics and expectations. On our last evening, Devon pulled me aside. Take care of him. He won't admit it, but exile hurt him in ways he's still recovering from. You're good for him. Better than any political alliance could have been. I'm just an Omega who bought a cabin, I said. No. Devon smiled. You're the woman who saw an exiled king and chose him anyway. That's rare. That's valuable. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. We returned to the cabin on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I'd been rejected 2 years before. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Nathaniel carried our bags inside while I stood in the clearing, breathing in the scent of pine and earth. The cabin looked the same, weathered logs, stone chimney, sagging porch, but I saw it differently now, not as a desperate purchase or a lucky accident, but as home. You're thinking too loud, Nathaniel said from the doorway. I can hear your thoughts from here. I turned to find him watching me with an expression that made my heart stutter. Love, I realized. That's what that look was. Not the desperate need that had driven our early days, but something steadier, deeper. I was thinking, I said slowly, that I bought this cabin for $500, and somehow I ended up with a husband, a pack, a future I never imagined possible. Regrets? Not even one. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides and kissed me. Not the careful, tentative touches we'd shared before, but something claiming and sure. I kissed him back, pouring every emotion I couldn't name into the contact. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I love you, Claire. Not because of the bond or the contract or fate, because you're stubborn and brave and you see past my crown to the man underneath, because you make me want to be better than I was. Tears streamed down my face. I love you too, even though it terrifies me, even though I don't completely trust it yet. I love you. We'll figure out the trust part, together. Together, I agreed. That night we lay in the loft. We'd finally gotten a proper mattress, watching stars through the window. Nathaniel's arms were around me, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. Do you think your ancestor knew? I asked quietly. The one who built the cabin and wrote the contract. Do you think he saw this coming? Probably. Seers tend to be annoyingly accurate about these things. His fingers traced patterns on my shoulder. Though I doubt even he predicted a rejected Omega buying the cabin at an estate auction for $500. Best $500 I ever spent. Best contract I ever inherited. We fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and the quiet certainty that we'd found something rare. Something real. Not because a contract demanded it, or because fate had forced it, but because we'd chosen each other. Every day, in small ways and large, we chose each other. 3 months later, Devon's condition stabilized. The council formally recognized the new governance structure, Devon as political king, Nathaniel as advisor and regent. both supported by their mates. It wasn't traditional, but it worked. 6 months after that, I stood in front of the pack assembly and spoke about Omega rights, about the value of those who'd been rejected or marginalized. I used my own story, the rejection, the cabin, the impossible love, to create change. Some listened, some didn't. But I'd learned that being heard was more important than being universally liked. A year after buying the cabin, Nathaniel and I stood on the porch at sunset. He'd added wind chimes that sang in the breeze. I'd planted a garden that was actually growing. The cabin had become ours in ways that transcended contracts and bonds. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing my question from that first day back. I took his hand, felt the spark that had never faded, not even one. "Good." He pulled me close. "Because you're stuck with me now, contract and all. I can think of worse fates." We went inside as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, the cabin welcoming us with the warmth of a place that had finally found its purpose. On the mantel, the mysterious cups of tea never appeared again. The cabin's magic had served its purpose, bringing together two souls who needed each other more than either had known. And in a wooden box carved with intricate patterns, Nathaniel added a new memory. The deed to a cabin bought for $500, signed by a woman who didn't know it came with a husband, kept by a king who didn't know he'd been waiting for her all along. Some things, it turned out, were worth more than crowns or status or perfect plans. Some things, like love found in impossible places, were priceless.